Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Cruiseday Tuesdays. Thank you for joining us. It's clear that these things are really working and keeping the community together. So just to recap, every 2 weeks we run a Cruiseday Tuesday where I get to interview a very interesting subject from the cruise line industry. And then in between that, we run a long format webinar episode where we dive into a bit more of a specific topic. So first of all, I just want to do a bit of housekeeping and confirm some of the news that we announced last week. And that is that Cruise Ship Interiors and Hospitality Expo America, which was scheduled to take place in September this year, has unfortunately cancelled. We made the difficult decision, and now we're focusing on our show in Europe, which is in London in December. But I just wanted to get that out there early. So, without further ado, please welcome my guest today, Derek Barkas. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, Toby. Thank you. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me on this. I'm delighted to be part of it. Yeah, Derek Barkas, worked specifically cruise industry the past 16 years, predominantly with YSA Design, who I have a very lovely relationship with. Before that, worked in restaurant, bar design, cut my back teeth in Newcastle, where I am now back home in Newcastle, which is lovely. Worked in Dubai 6 years. Very high-end luxury hotels, residential projects. So I have the kind of benefit between the cruise industry and the land-based design. So yeah, great career. Very blessed.
Very good. Okay, well, look, welcome to the show. So based on that sounds like what, over 20 years of design experience?
29.
29 years of design experience. So I cannot help myself but to ask you, what has changed in 29 years of designing hotels, luxury hotels and ships?
Oh goodness me, there's a huge question. I think fundamentally design itself has not changed. The nuts and bolts of design will probably never change because it is fundamentally all about the end user and the guest. Design style and the expectation of let's talk about cruise ships specifically here.
Yeah,
I think the overall feeling for a design of a cruise ship probably back in the 80s was very glitzy, very glammy, very kind of Love Boat-esque, this kind of preconceived idea. And a lot of it was. The development of the design has gone from that, as a broad sense, to a much more contemporary, much more land-based feeling, the expectations of the guest because of the demographic. But also because of the amount of cruise ships now on the water, the competition has had to react to that demographic. So, you're seeing a lot more contemporary, very, very beautiful designs, beautiful materials. We'll talk about materials a little later, but the choice of materials has increased, and therefore given designers a lot more scope to create beauty, awe, and wonder. So yeah, it's changed dramatically.
Yeah, and would you say that you've been able to pull a lot of your experience from the hotel design sector into the cruise industry? I mean, is that somewhere you go for, I would say, inspiration?
Absolutely. And also high-end residential. The fact that the furniture and the materials and the specification system these days is much more about luxury, comfort, and reacting to a guest expectation. Now, on any ship, you will find anything from a hot dog stand to a Michelin star restaurant, and the responses to that as designers, we have to always have on our radar, as I said earlier, the end user. We are creating experiences, we're creating wonder, and we're creating memories, and that's what any real good designer should and ought to do.
Yeah. So I've seen that you're very active on LinkedIn, and you always, recently you've been posting some of the sketches that you've done, and back in, perhaps towards the start of your career. How has the design actually, doing the design changed over those years with technology? Because do you see many designers sketching anymore?
Sadly, no. It's something that I always encourage and actively encourage. It's something I still do very much in terms, even when I'm doing a plan layout or a sort of volume space, I will build that up, and I will now, rather than doing a hand drawing, I now can collaborate or use something like SketchUp to create a white model. Then you know that you have a true volume identity, whereas before it was a little bit of guesswork. That fluidity also actually did help, though. That kind of interpretation of a sketch used to be a very wonderful thing to have, and it's a magical tool to use when you're sitting across the table from a client to instantly get a response and say, what are you thinking? This is how we were thinking. This is what we're going to do here. This is the detail I was thinking here. And that's a very instant response. And I think that's something which sadly is being not phased out. I think because the more technology comes in, it's replaced things. So, but what I do actually as a mentor and have been for the past few years in the office is to encourage drawing. I've always said, look, get it down on paper first. Get it, because that often a machine is a filter between your thought process and the creative idea. When you sketch it, it's immediate. So yeah, technology is both, it's a wonderful thing, don't get me wrong. I mean, the 3D renderings are now in VR, which is coming very, very clearly into the picture, walkthroughs and you know, you said it. I don't know if you've ever used it, Toby, I don't know if you used it at the YSA stand, but my goodness me, it's an experience.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I saw that.
And that's only going to get better. You know, it can only go one way. So, you know, but I think fundamentally interior design, like all art-based disciplines, should include the art of sketching, and you know, a lot of the top designers are still using that as a tool, and should do.
And how would you say that? So if you think about technology, that's impacting the actual designer's ability to design, or you know, the resource they have. How is it impacting how you design? What designs you put forward to perhaps a ship owner or a hotel owner? In terms of like, do you have to factor something different in for the cabins? You know, with all this technology that's happening.
What the benefit is again speed. Once you've created a model, once you've created a rendering, it's quite easy and less time consuming than to do 3 or 4 separate hand-drawn renderings as we used to do. Now it's a click of a button, and you know, you can change that wall from a timber feature wall to you know, and that you therefore have the opportunity to show various different levels. There's a danger in that, mind, because you know, if you give too many options, then you will have a whole brand new discussion. However, you know, it's a wonderful tool. I mean, let's talk about Revit and how models are being built these days, and how the whole entire ship can be built as a model, and it can be imported. Let's say, because any normal project will have perhaps 3 or 4 or 5 designers on there. You can import all of their designs, and really, especially in transition areas, for example, which are always kind of a bone of contention. Who owns it? Who's going to have the? You know, that it creates a much more sort of symbiotic relationship between all of those disciplines. So it's from a build perspective, this sort of BIM and Revit revolution, if you like, is it's wonderful. It saves an awful lot of time. So yeah, it's definitely a worthwhile thing. But I still go back to the sketching, and I think an awful lot of certainly guys at my age will sit and draw, because it's almost in our DNA to do that, and I don't think I'll ever change. I don't think I'll ever stop drawing. To be fair.
And on the topic of trends, then, I mean, we speak about technology. There's also this. It's almost a buzzword at the moment, is wellness. And how do you? I mean, 29 years ago, did anyone even know what the word wellness meant when it came to design? Was that a thing?
No, I think it goes hand in hand with sustainability, really, Toby. I think it goes, you know, it's almost part of the same body, you know, that sort of conscious and mindful way of living, what goes into your body. And, you know, there's this old cliche that my body's a temple, which was used as an old hippie term. I think that is much more prominent now. I really do. You know, the yoga is kicked off, Pilates is really huge all over the world. People are taking holidays to, for example, Bali, and, you know, and really going on these retreats. It's mind, body, and soul kind of wellness centers. So gyms are becoming a lot more, in terms of the design, less industrial in certain aspects, and a lot more kind of holistic, where you have meditation centers, you have yoga rooms, you have Pilates rooms, you have aerobics rooms, spas, which are reflective of Mother Nature. You know, they're all, you walk through any spa and they'll have an element of Mother Nature in there. And I think that is certainly a reflection of today's society. Both, I mean, I don't think it's demographically specific. Younger guys absolutely are kind of calling for this, but I think the older generation, and I can speak for myself here, meditation and healthy eating and well-being in the mind and the body is very, very apparent these days, and as designers we've got to react to that.
And is almost a request that's coming from the cruise lines themselves? So, for example, if you think of a cruise line looking to design a ship, a new build, are they specifically asking for areas dedicated to meditation and yoga, and you know, we've seen that the Virgin Voyages on their new ship, they've got areas that are specifically for that. Is that a trend that's staying?
Absolutely. That's a very simple yes. Yeah, it's something which we've been asked for quite considerably. How we approach that, it's becoming an awful lot less nuts and bolts and much more of a holistic approach to spa experiences and exercise and daily well-being. So the food is also being looked at very closely as well by cruise lines. So it's and where the food comes from, that's very important too. Is it locally based? Is it locally sourced? So all these things are being considered, and again, that's a wonderful thing. Wonderful thing.
So would you say that in order to, if you're designing a ship that really wants to focus on wellness and you know, the whole retreat, do you think that the actual food offering has to be cohesive with the design? So actually, if you've got this ship that's all about health, you don't really want to go to a buffet and have a cheeseburger for dinner. You know, it doesn't really tie everything together, does it?
Well, no, they don't. But I think if it's a very specific cruise based on wellness, then of course everything has to tie up. But you know, on a cruise ship of 3,500 passengers, you know, you're talking that's a huge ask, and it's a massive task for the food operation. However, having said that, you know, buffets can respond to that very, very easily. You know, the buffet counters, and you know how it is. You know, there's an awful lot on offer there. So veganism is becoming huge these days. My wife is a vegetarian. I'm kind of a forced vegetarian. You know, so and it's you know, in my experience, you know, that is even you just have to look at high streets, how that has responded to that whole. I don't want to call it a movement, because I do genuinely think it is a very conscious change in society and how we live our lives.
I'm a pescatarian 4 years now, and it was all through watching just an episode, a documentary on Netflix or whatever it was, and all of a sudden changes your whole world, right?
Right.
Yeah. So on that topic, then, that sort of leads us on to the big topic which everyone's talking about, which is sustainability. So how do you personally react to the whole sustainability issue, from, you know, sourcing materials to the way your designs look? What's your thinking on sustainability?
Well, you know, a huge topic, isn't it? And we talked about in Barcelona, didn't we? Quite in depth. And you know, and that is a wonderful response. And again, it's still in its infancy, quite frankly, it is. You know, but when we're talking, because it's multidimensional, it isn't just about saying, well, that carpet is made of X, Y, Z material. It's the durability that has to be considered in all these things, because, you know, carpet perhaps has got a lifespan of 3 to 5 years. Maybe we have to start looking at how can we extend that life. Then design comes into it. You know, how do we make that design more timeless? So, you know, there's all this domino effect of how we approach that. Furniture, for example, durability. It's all really about durability. Weight, because when you're talking about on a ship, everything is weight. You know, where does that sort of ceramic? You know, we get these sort of 2-3 millimeter ceramics now, which really do have a huge impact on how we use materials, and that's important. The whole lighting of a ship, the introduction of LED has made a huge impact. Propulsion systems, but in terms of a design scenario, you know, we are looking at Martindale's. You know, we used to. I'd be looking at least 30, but to be fair, I think we've got to go a little higher now. You know, to ensure that durability, that long lasting, because you've got to think forward to the next dry dock. You always have to think those next steps. You know, how do we approach that? What will we do when that dry dock comes along?
And as a designer, Derek, so what are the questions that you're asking? Because, you know, whether the pressure's coming from the cruise line to become more sustainable, or it's actually the designer that wants this space, you know, to be well thought out. What are the questions that you're asking your suppliers? So if you think of a carpet company or a fabrics company, what are the questions?
I mean, for me, it's all about what is your impact? What are your off gases? What is your sort of waste production? How do you deal with that? There are certain companies who will recycle their waste and put it back into the process, or they sell it off to somebody else who will then do something with it. If it's a natural material, what are your sources? What's the impact on the land? What's the impact on the forestry? What's the impact on the is it fair trade? Are we, you know, is this fabric being made in India or Bangladesh or, you know, Sri Lanka, for example? You know, how is that being transported? What is your stock items? How are you how are you approaching this kind of very global awareness, which again, 20 years ago wasn't really a discussion. 30 years ago, you know, we were walking around and smelling lead from petrol. It's all linked. It's all very, very linked. And I think what I believe, what I'm hearing from the industry and from what I'm hearing from a lot of suppliers is they are genuinely trying their best, and because nothing happens overnight. Nothing will ever happen overnight, and I think it's unfair to expect that. I think as long as there is an awareness and a strategy to decrease what goes out into the, you know, to pollute the world, how we combat that, because I think for us, we would specify somebody who has that consciousness, that ethos of this is what we're trying to do. So I think as a sales pitch, anybody coming to me, you know, we've got this wonderful selection of fabrics. My questions would be, where's it from? Where do you make it? What's the material? What's the durability? You know, and what do you do with the waste? And then, you know, you come down to dry docks where you're stripping out potentially so much material. What do we do with that material at that point? And I think that's that's a discussion probably on the side, but it is a very, very worthwhile discussion to have.
And what would you say then? So, for example, if you're looking, let's go for carpet because that's a good example. If you've got a carpet company that can supply something that is sustainable, and that's quite a loose term, but you know, you're happy with that criteria that they're hitting, and then you've got another company that isn't as sustainable, but price is obviously, you know, it's a lot cheaper in price. How do you find the balance on that? Because you've got to think about the budget as well, right?
We absolutely have to think about the budget, and quite often that's owner driven. We can only advise, and we can only be transparent in how we specify, and I think it's our duty to be transparent. You know, there's no such thing as a favorite here. You know, we quite often are given, certainly in a dry dock situation, given a supplier, a preferred supplier, who we'll work together with, because of course you can imagine on the ship there are thousands square meters of carpet to be provided. So, you know, the quantity of scale and all the rest of it will dictate who we work together with. So to get back to your question, who would we choose? We would, personally, I'd prefer to choose the more sustainable aspect of that choice, of that specification. But there are so many other things that need to be ticked, such as design, availability, speed of delivery, logistics, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and do you feel that there's enough pressure coming from the cruise lines themselves to actually go for the more sustainable option, or do you think, just to give you an example, when we launched the event 2 years ago, I remember reaching out to a few people, and obviously I won't say any names, and I asked, you know, how important is sustainability to you? Because this was we were looking at a conference session at the first show, and it wasn't really it wasn't enough of a priority for us to even really focus on it at the Miami show, and that was 2 years ago. If you think about now, I mean, it's the only topic that people want to talk about. So is there enough? Has it changed in the last couple of years? Is there a lot of pressure now coming from the cruise lines?
Yes, and designers too. You know, and I think the pressure is on themselves also. I think, you know, you kind of light that neon sign enough, and people start to take notice. And look, as I said earlier, things don't happen overnight, and I don't think anybody expects things to happen overnight. Like any branch of any business, you know, there's a reaction time, and then there is a process within that to reach a goal. As long as you don't lose that guiding star, then it's happy days for me. I think, you know, it's essential that we have it on our radar. I think Greta Thunberg has something to do with all of this.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah. So moving on then, having experience in both cruise and land-based design, what do you think about the competition now that's coming from the land-based designers? And we see these famous designers that are now taking on cruise projects. How do you think that's changing the landscape in terms of, you know, winning contracts?
I think competition is good. It makes you hone your skills. It makes you look at yourself a little bit deeper. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with competition. For me, there's enough of the business to go around. But, you know, there are wonderful designers coming in, and I've worked together with, you know, on certain projects which I can't mention. But I mean, Kelly Hoppen, for example, who's coming in, you know, and she was on the edge, I believe, and wonderful designs. It's just another way of looking at design. And I think as for me to employ somebody, I wouldn't necessarily require them to have worked on ships. In fact, quite the contrary. I think it's very nice that they have land-based design, as a background, because that is such a more vibrant, much more reactive, much faster turnaround of design ideas. You know, you look at the high streets restaurants that pop up and disappear. The higher end restaurants, which are always sort of coming on, the Gordon Ramsays and the Jamie Olivers of the world, you know, who are very reactionary, and they are driving the expectations of the guests on board the ships that we are designing. So we have to stay in line with that. We have to, and you know, we can't let that one fall by the wayside. A few years ago, everything was ship shape, and that was the terminology that was used. These days, that's really going away. It's kind of drifting away, pardon the pun, but that is being kind of almost phased out. In pools are becoming a lot more like rooftop bars or high-end sort of Miami poolside with the cabanas and these beautiful awnings. So you know, there is these guys like the Rockwell Group, and you know, I work together with a wonderful company called iCrave, and you know, this sort of real DNA of design. Really, you know, they're pulling these ideas out of these fantastic designers. What you do need, of course, is somebody like myself, my very old self, guiding that design and ensuring that it actually can be implemented on board a ship.
That is key here, right? Because you know, I've spoken with other designers in actually working for the cruise brands, and the challenge is, you know, bringing in a land-based designer. You get some beautiful ideas, but sometimes they don't meet the strict regulations that we're all used to. How do you manage that?
Well, that's managed from the get-go. You know, that is something which is pre-set out in the contract and pre-established via either a meeting, an onboard meeting, a kind of kick-off meeting. There are certain documentations which are sent out to all the designers to outline the limitations of the IMO, ceiling heights, why we do things a certain way, fire doors, you know, all these sort of very fundamentals, which they have that on their radar. We are there as the more senior designers, and when I say we, I'm talking about the kind of stalwarts of the market, so AD Associates, YSA, to the SMC, to those guys, Dado, all those guys, you know, who have got that very intrinsic history within cruise ships, and it's in their DNA. So it's not a difficult process. It's about communication. It's an open dialogue, and it's redlining drawings. No, you can't quite do that. This is what we have to do, and you know, that's a dialogue, and it's a constant correspondence thing. So yeah, it works. It works.
So is there any advice you would give to like a land-based designer perhaps that's looking at the cruise industry? Would you say do your homework before you start thinking about coming in, or would you say that, you know, just jump in and learn as you go?
Well, I think, you know, it's a two-edged sword. You know, you never want to limit creativity, but any good designer should be able to design within a space, any given space, whatever that might be, with the limitations of ceiling height, classifications, escape routes, and all the rest of it. That doesn't really offer them any challenges. I personally don't feel. The fear element probably comes in when you do have all the SOLAS and the IMO, and you know, the USPH, all of these kind of initial laws, rules, and regulations. But again, you know, if you're working together and collaborating with a designer or an architect who has this fundamental knowledge gained over many years, by the way, of ships, and basically what not to do. It's not what to do, it's what not to do. As long as you have somebody at the helm there, be that a company or an individual, again, with communication, it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah. So I suppose, you know, the next question I'm going to ask you is quite a broad one, but I think it's it's so important that we talk about it, is the C word, and that's coronavirus. You know, we've had guests on the show, and it's, you know, some people can say more than others if they're representing a cruise line. Maybe they're limited into what they can speculate. So I'll ask you the broad question: is how is design going to be impacted by coronavirus over the next few years?
Yeah, interesting one. It's because it's so fresh in everybody's mind, isn't it? And I think we're all still reeling a little bit from what that C word means, and what that you know, how it will reflect. I think a knee-jerk reaction would be to talk about screens and talk about division and to talk about, but that's fundamentally not what cruising is about, is it? We have to be very real, and we have to be very sympathetic when we talk about it, and how we tackle that. Now, I don't have a magic ball and a crystal ball. I don't have a magic wand to make anything disappear. But I think common sense and my intuition would be that we have to start to look at how, I mean, let's talk about the buffet on board a ship.
Please.
The hub of the ship, which is very hands-on, close contact, queues of people, self-serving with food, a lot of, now I think USPH, together with SOLAS, will have something to say on these matters, and you know, how we, maybe there's a disconnect between the food and the passenger, but that is almost, that's a very sad solution to me, you know, it may well go that way. You know, if you go into, and I'm going to be very crass here, and please forgive me, but you know, with McDonald's, you go in and you have a touch screen and you order your food and then it's delivered. You know, that it could come to that. I'm not saying it will, but I think, you know, if you think fundamentally what this C word has done to everybody and done to society as a whole, and how we are reacting, and it's not just the cruise ship, it's hotels and it's bars and restaurants, and how are they reacting to it? You're already seeing greenhouses sat out in outdoor spaces, and you know, that sort of reactionary thing, which is a very temporary solution, but perhaps that's a long-term thing. Who knows? Who knows? I certainly don't know. However, you know, real estate on board a ship is very, very precious, as we all know. Every square centimeter is precious, both ceiling height, both on the floor plan or the GA. How do we tackle corridors which are fundamentally 1.82 meters wide? You know, you're already below the requirement. You know, but ships are not going to change. Hulls are not going to change, and there are so many ships within the build process sitting in shipyards right now, waiting for the workers to come back and begin working on them again. It's a very difficult one, Toby, and I don't think it's insurmountable. I think we have to be guided by the health and safety aspect first and foremost. You know, we're going to have, and as designers, we're going to have to react to that and follow those guidelines, and of course we always will. We always will.
Well, if you think about, you know, the whole 2 meter, and it's different in different countries, I know, but let's just work on what they're saying in the UK. If you think about 2 meter distancing, that can't be a long-term plan, right? Because once the R number's below a certain amount and it goes away, there's no way that in 3 years' time that they're going to be enforcing 2 meters. So to actually change the structure of a ship doesn't sound plausible. So no. So if we think about some of the shorter term things that the cruise lines might be doing, you know, think about restaurants. Do you think it's likely in bars or casinos that they're going to redesign the spaces, or do you think there'll be sort of temporary measures put in place?
The latter. I think the temporary measures put in place, and I think it's it'll be reactionary. It'll be a very ad hoc way of doing it. I really cannot see large structures, be it on land or on the sea, torn apart to accommodate what is a temporary situation, an awful situation, but a very temporary situation. So I don't think we need to worry too much about restructuring a ship or how it's built. I really don't. I think it's common sense, and I believe the cruise lines, working together with the authorities, will come up with a system. We talked a little earlier, didn't we, about lifts and about how staircases and how that flow of traffic through a ship and how you move within a ship. You know, usually you have a forward, aft, and a mid. These things will have to be done on almost a traffic light system, for example. You go up the staircase, you come down the staircase. You know, it may well be that
one-way systems, or our good friend Stephen Fryers, who's on the advisory board for the show, he's been putting some really interesting sort of topics of discussion on his LinkedIn profile, and one was, you know, getting on and off the ship. I think that's one of the busiest times where people are crowded. You know, how do you control, or how do you design for the flow, the passenger flow? I mean, is that something that someone like you would be involved in, or is that someone on the actual terminal side?
I think the terminal side, really. I think long term we would definitely be involved in it as an architectural aspect. But I think short term, you know, we would have to, if let's say, I mean, the only time we would get involved in that is if there was a design situation, a dry dock, or even a new build, and they were very insistent on these are the rules and regulations, and we're going to carry this forward for the next 10, 15, 20 years. So, you know, that's kind of a very open book at the minute. But again, as designers, it would be our responsibility to assist and make that as invisible as possible. You know, it's with signage and the correct way of doing it, so it doesn't, you know, it doesn't look like lipstick on a pig. Let's say that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So the next thing that would be interesting to talk about is the procurement process in terms of, finding new suppliers. We done a full-length session last week on this topic, but it'd be good to get your opinion. What are some of the do's and don'ts then for actually getting specified by someone like yourself? I mean, is there anything you're seeing from the supply chain that you do or you don't like?
Because the ship is so broad, it's a floating city, isn't it? We are open to, I think our criteria is, are they beautiful? Are they functional? Do they meet all the requirements?
Yeah.
And if they meet those three, it is an open door policy. We are not, personally, I'm certainly not close to anything which isn't beautiful. It looks great, it's comfortable. Let's take a chair, for example. It looks great, it's comfortable, it fits all the criteria of the space that I'm putting in there. Happy days. Then it's going to be put forward. The don'ts, I guess, is coming in and not meeting all of those three criteria, and that doesn't matter if it's fabric or a carpet or a wall finish or so. All these criteria must be met. So I think the don'ts. You have to remember that designers we have this influx constantly daily of companies pushing their products, and rightly so. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's quite a large amount of our time is spent both looking for new materials and ways to make our interiors more beautiful and more impressive and unique. We have our standard list of go-to people, and that will always be the case. That unfortunately, because that comes down to service, it comes down to longevity and also relationships.
Yeah.
I think the service is a very good point. That's something which, it's not just service to us, but it's service to delivery on board. It's their logistics and how they and where they source their material from, which takes us back again to the sustainability item. So the don'ts are not, just don't expect designers because you have a lovely chair if it's not A, comfortable, B, beautiful, C, doesn't meet the criteria, because that's not going to happen. IMO is a very expensive thing to go through for, and we understand that. And again, we've had talk about that, but it's something which is really essential. We have to have it. It's one of those things. It does limit often, but you know what? Past 5 years, it's been incredible the amount of suppliers, manufacturers who've responded and want to get into the market. And I think purely that is a reaction from the land-based designers too.
Yeah,
I think that is intrinsically linked. I think it's a very symbiotic thing there. So yeah.
Yeah, and so in terms of, we've spoken about coronavirus and we've spoken about some of the suppliers. Do you see anything changing with regards to the materials being used? We've spoken about it a few times with different fabrics, but is there anything that you're seeing change? Any different trends in terms of the materials used?
I think easily cleanable materials such as leather or fake leather, those are going to, I think, maybe increase. However, you've got to balance that out with texture, and it's all part of the design brief, isn't it? If you have a place full of leather, it's going to look cold and it's going to look very awful. There are fabric developers now which are developing this kind of germ-free, or at least combating the germ or virus situation, and that is going to be a biggie. That's going to be quite large and quite huge, and I think it's something that has to be taken into account. A carpet is a carpet. If you do an ex-minister, an 80-20 carpet, that will always have its inherent goodness in there, built in. Natural materials, of course, quite often we can't use natural materials such as wood. Veneers, for example, may well play a part, but ceramics, real stone is a weight. All of these natural materials, they also have inherently a natural defense against bacteria. Strangely enough, Mother Earth had to do her thing again. But it is all very, very determined on how we are using the material within our designs, and our designs have to be reflective. It's because interior design, it's so many facets to it. We can't just have all stone, and we can't just have all leather. We have to have texture, we have to have contrast, we have to have that diversity within that. So yeah, it's an interesting one, but I think the next few months, next year, the next 2 years are going to really we'll see a large response in how people respond to that, how manufacturers respond to that.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, well, look, thank you very much for your time today, Derek. I'm going to finish off with something that we're going to be calling the Fast Five now, which is just 5 questions off topic, and you've got to answer them for a bit of fun. So, first question: what's the first place you're going to visit once lockdown's over?
First visit will be Norway. Norway to see my son.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
What's the first drink you're going to order in the pub?
Gin and tonic.
Good choice. Any new lockdown habits you've developed? Anything you've learned since being at home?
New habits, gardening. We're growing our own veg.
Very good. And you think that will carry, right? That will carry on?
Do you know what? I think it will. It's really fun. I ate my first radish yesterday. It was lovely. It was brilliant. Yeah.
I was going to say, there's only so much crest sandwiches you can eat, though, isn't there?
we have avocados. Hey, we've got one growing in the garden.
Nice. Next one is any impulsive online shopping purchases?
Yeah, a ladder for my VW, my old, this one here on the wall, like you can see. That's going on my VW, this one here.
Nice.
On my classic VW camper. Yeah.
And finally, any video meetings in your pajamas on the lower half? Be honest.
Have I? Yes. Yesterday I had one. Yeah,
Very
top pajama bottoms, yeah, and a t-shirt. Yeah. But
very good. Okay, guys. Well, thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next week for our next episode of Cruise Conversations. Derek, you want to finish by ending with anything? Nice message to the industry?
Just the very best of luck to everybody out there. You know, we're all in the same boat, but what a wonderful family we have. So I wish each and everybody who I've known over the years, had the blessing to know and had the pleasure to work with, crack on. We're going to get there, absolutely. So,
very good. Okay, guys, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Cheers, Derek.
Thanks, Louis. Thank you. Bye-bye.